Now let us discuss about the freedom of press under the ambit of Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A. As I already stated in the previous presentation, US Constitution expressly guarantees freedom of press. In India, freedom of press is impliedly guaranteed under the freedom of speech and expression. I am stressing on the expression implied. In India, freedom of press is impliedly guaranteed under the freedom of speech and expression. In Sakal Newspapers Limited versus Union of India, the court held that freedom of press is the species of which freedom of expression is a genus. Freedom of press is also an integral character of democracy. As I explained earlier, one of the objectives of guaranteeing freedom of speech and expression is to discover the truth. The press seeks to advance public interest by publishing facts and opinions without which a democratic electorate cannot make responsible judgments. Articles and news are published in the press time to time to expose the weaknesses of the government. During COVID-19 outbreak and subsequent lockdown, it is because of the media reports the Supreme Court took up the matter pertaining to the human rights violation of the migrant labor and directed the Government of India to take effective measures for their safety and survivability. However, Government of India approached the Supreme Court to empower them to impose pre-censorship on media for curtailing the fake news dissemination. The Supreme Court, however, mentioned that in the name of curtailing of the fake news, government cannot impose pre-censorship over the freedom of press. So this tug of war between Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A, that is freedom of press, and Article 19 Clause 2, that is government's power to impose restrictions on freedom of press, can be seen from the right from the inception of the Constitution. The case laws such as Ramesh Thapar, Brijbhushan, Amarnath Bali, Shaila Baladevi judgments and the subsequent amendment to Article 19 Clause 2, that is the First Amendment Act, reflects that Government of India in the name of reasonable restrictions always attempts to curtail the freedom of press. Judiciary being the safeguard had to balance between the Article 19 Clause 1A and Article 19 Clause 2. The attempt of the judiciary in balancing both fundamental freedom and sovereign power of the state to impose restrictions on freedom can be seen through case laws. Now let us discuss the case laws relating to the freedom of press. The first case is Express Newspapers Limited versus Union of India, AIR 1958 SC 578. Before going into the details of this case, let me explain you that primarily media houses enjoy freedom of press under Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A. But the media houses, being corporate entities, also enjoy Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause G, that is, right to trade and commerce. The reasonable restrictions under Article 19 Clause 6 are broader compared to Article 19 Clause 2. Hence, the Government of India always attempted to impose restriction upon the freedom of press in an indirect way, that is, through laws cloaked under the head regulation of commercial activities of the media houses. This case is a classic example of a regulation imposing restrictions on the commercial aspect of the activity of newspapers directly and freedom of speech and expression indirectly. In this case, the provisions of the Working Journalists Conditions of Service and Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1956 was challenged as interfering with the right of the freedom of the press. The objective of the act was to specify the wages and conditions of service of the working journalists to ameliorate their financial and working conditions. The petitioners contended that it would impose heavy financial burden on the newspaper establishments which did not have the resources to meet the new financial responsibilities and might have to close down. According to petitioners, the legislation has effect of having a direct and preferential burden on the press and had a tendency to curtail circulation and thereby narrow the scope of dissemination of information. Now, coming to the judgment part, this contention of the petitioners was not accepted by the court. According to the court, unless there is direct or inevitable consequences of the measures enacted in the impugned legislation over the freedom of speech and expression, Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A cannot be invoked. Here, the court applied the effect versus subject matter test. According to the court, since the subject matter of the impugned legislation is with regard to the additional financial burden imposed on media houses with regard to the betterment of the working conditions of the journalists, the same is a matter of trade and has no effect on freedom of press. The petitioners have a better chance if they argued for violation of Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause G. But petitioners contended that those media houses which cannot afford to pay the employees will vanish and there will be reduced percentage of dissemination of news due to the closure of certain media houses. Thus, the same is having direct impact on freedom of speech and expression. The court did not buy this argument and held that the present situation in this case is nothing but choosing between the two competing freedoms, freedom of the press and freedom of trade and commerce. The court in this case was convinced that the working conditions in the newspaper industry were not satisfactory and the lot of working journalists are suffering financially due to the low wages. So, the impugned legislation in attempting to ameliorate the conditions of the working journalists was characterized as directing towards the business aspect of the newspaper activity, and the repercussions on the news and views aspect was not of that order so as to affect adversely the right of circulation. The closing down of the marginal newspaper establishment was noticed only as a possible eventuality, and its impact on the right to circulate was a remote consequence. To conclude, to apply freedom of press guaranteed under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A, it is required that the said legislative or executive restriction shall consist of the subject matter dealing with the freedom of press or freedom of speech and expression, or the effect of the legislative or executive restriction shall have effect on the enjoyment of freedom of press or freedom of speech and expression. Unless and until the establishment of the nexus between the subject matter of the impugned legislation or the effect of the impugned legislation is not with the freedom of speech and expression, invoking Article 19, Clause 2 is not possible. Now coming to the next case, that is Hamdard Davakhana versus Union of India, AR 1960 SC 554. Before entering into this case, let me explain that Supreme Court of India for certain period held that advertisement is a commercial speech and same is outside the ambit of Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A. According to court, the freedom of press guaranteed under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A is limited to the dissemination of information in the public interest, not in the commercial interest. The commercial interest of the media houses has to be dealt under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause Z. Now coming to the facts of this case. In this case, the constitutional validity of the Drugs and Magic Remedies Objectionable Advertisements Act 1954 was challenged. The object of the act was to prevent the self-medication and self-treatment by prohibiting instruments which may be used to advocate the same or which tended to spread the evil. This restriction on advertisement was challenged for being in violation of Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A. As I explained earlier, the court in this case interpreted the term advertisement as commercial speech and held to be outside the ambit of Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A. According to the court, the advertisements affected by the Act do not fall within the words freedom of speech. The scope and ambit of the Act, that is its true nature and character, is not to interfere with the freedom of speech and expression, but to deal with the freedom of trade and business. There is no direct abridgment of the right of free speech, and mere incidental interference with such right would no alter the character of the law. To identify the true nature and character of the impugned legislation, the court in this case applied the doctrine of Pith and substance. According to the court, it is not the form or incidental infringement that determines the constitutionality of a statute in reference to the rights guaranteed under Article 19, Clause 1, but the reality and substance. When an enactment is challenged on the ground of violation of fundamental rights, it is necessary to ascertain the true nature and character of the impugned legislation. That is, its subject matter, the area in which it is intended to operate, its purport, and intent. In order to do so, it is legitimate to take into consideration all the factors such as the history of the legislation, the purpose of the legislation, the surrounding circumstances and conditions, the mischief intended to be suppressed, the remedy proposed by the legislature, and the true reason for the remedy. Initially, there is a presumption in favor of the constitutionality of an enactment. That is, doctrine of presumption of initial validity. The Act, read as a whole, does not merely prohibit advertisements relating to drugs and medicines connected with diseases expressly mentioned in the Act, but they cover all advertisements which are objectionable or unethical and are used to promote self medication or self treatment. This case basically kept commercial speech out of the purview of Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A. According to the court in Hamdard Dawakana case, only such dissemination of information which is in the public interest falls under the ambit of Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A. Again, I am repeating, to fall under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A, the advertisement or the dissemination of the information shall be in the public interest. Then only it can be considered as part of Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A. Any advertisement which is consisting of the commercial aspect without having any nexus with the public interest falls under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause G. The next case is Sakal Papers versus Union of India, AER 1962, SC 305. Again, in this case, the story is about choosing between Article 19, Clause 1A and Article 19, Clause 1G. The Newspaper Price and Page Act 1956 and a government order thereunder sought to regulate the number of pages according to the price charged, prescribed the number of supplements to be published, and regulate the size and area of advertisements in relation to other matter contained in a newspaper. Thus, the number of pages published by a newspaper dependent upon the price charged to the reader. The government contended that this was commerce and the right to trade, a separate fundamental right which could be restricted only on the grounds mentioned under Article 19, Clause 6. The court struck down the impugned legislation and the related government order as invalid for its purpose was to reduce circulation of some newspapers by making their price unattractively high for their readers. The court held that the dissemination of news and commercial activities of the newspapers was entirely different. Here, again, the court held that since the case is falling under the ambit of Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause G, the restrictions which can be imposed shall be satisfied under 19, Clause 6. This case has nothing to do with Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A and subsequently 19, Clause 2. Now, coming to the critic, the impugned legislation in Sakal Papers would have passed the scrutiny of the Supreme Court if it had provided only for the regulation of the size of area of advertisements. An advertisement is a form of speech, but every advertisement is not a matter dealing with the freedom of speech and expression of ideas. In order to bring advertisement within the concept of freedom of speech and expression, its object should be to propagate the ideas and furtherance of literature or human thought in the public interest. If the object is to promote commercial and other interests by bringing the matter to the notice of the public, it assumes a different character and may possibly fall within the framework of Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause G. The true nature and character of the advertisement is reflected by the object which it sought to achieve. To the extent the size and area of the advertisements in a newspaper are to be regulated to meet the crisis of unfair competition in the newspaper industry, It may be said that the object was not to put curb on the propagation of ideas, but to reorganize the business aspect of the activity of the newspapers in the interest of the general public, which is protected under Article 19, Clause 6. Now, coming to the next case, Bennett Coleman and Company versus Union of India, AR 1973 SC 106. Again, this case is about choosing between freedom of press and freedom of trade. In this case, the Times of India group complained against a newsprint quota and ingeniously argued that this commercial policy impacted upon press freedom as it limits news space. In this case, petitioners challenged the restrictions on the import of newsprint under Import Control Order 1955, the regulation of sale, acquisition, and use of newsprint under Newsprint Order 1962, and the direct regulation of size and circulation of newspapers under the Newsprint Policy of 1972 to 73. In those days, India faced a shortage of indigenous newsprint, therefore, it has to be imported from foreign countries. Due to the shortage of foreign exchange, inadequate quantity of imported newsprint required some restrictions to be imposed. For dailies with a circulation up to 1 lakh copies, sealing of 10 pages has been imposed. According to the petitioners, a dominant direction of the policy was to curtail the growth of the big newspapers, which could not increase the number of pages, page area, or periodicity by reducing circulation to meet their requirement, even within their admissible quota of newsprint. The Supreme Court of India, in this case, for the first time accepted that the subject matter of the impugned legislation, though deals with the financial aspect of the media houses, still effect of the legislation is upon the freedom of press. The court held that the press had the right to free publication and circulation, and that the freedom of the press is both quantitative and qualitative. According to the court, the impugned newsprint policy was unconstitutional as its quantitative restrictions were not justified by a shortage of newsprint. However, the newsprint order and import control order were not struck down by a majority of the judgment. In his dissenting judgment, Justice Matthew observed that there was no direct regulation of content and that a restriction on number of pages did not mean an abridgment of freedom of expression. He reasoned that the control of newsprint and regulating its distribution was necessary to ensure that it was effectively utilized, insofar as it made newsprint utilization efficient and prevented monopoly by a few newspapers. The policy expanded rather than abridged freedom of speech and expression. He disagreed with the majority judgment and held that the policy was not unconstitutional. To conclude, in this case, for the first time, the court marched ahead of the subject matter test and applied the effect test and concluded that the impugned legislation has direct effect on the freedom of press. Next case in this series is Indian Express Newspapers Bombay Private Limited versus Union of India, AIR 1986 SC 515. Again, this case also deals with the freedom of press and freedom of trade. The petitioners in this case were companies, employees, and shareholders, as well as trusts engaged in the publication of newspapers. They challenged the import duty on newsprint under the Customs Tariff Act 1975 and the auxiliary duty under the Finance Act 1981 as modified by notifications under the Customs Act 1962 with effect from March 1st, 1981. Prior to this notification, newsprint had enjoyed exemption from customs duty. Petitioners contended that the imposition of this duty had an adverse effect on costs and circulation and therefore had a crippling effect on freedom of expression under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A of the Indian Constitution and the freedom to practice any trade or occupation under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause Z. The petitioners asserted that no public interest justified such an interference with these fundamental rights because foreign exchange position of India was comfortable at that time. Government contended that the burden of cost borne by the newspapers and the position of foreign exchange reserves were irrelevant considerations. The public interest involved in taxation was to increase the revenue of the government, a burden that is borne by all citizens of the country. It asserted that the exemption granted to newsprint was not justified and therefore could be removed by the government. The Supreme Court of India in this case observed that the government was indeed empowered to levy taxes affecting the publication of newspapers because such publication could be characterized as an industry and must be subject to same levies as other industries. Imposing tax is a sovereign power. However, where the power of taxation encroaches upon the freedom of expression under Article 19, Clause 1a, the restriction on the freedom must be within reasonable limits laid down under Article 19, Clause 2. Reasonable limits have been outlined in Article 19, Clause 2, wherein public interest is a ground that may be taken to restrict freedom of expression. Hence, the court found the ground under which restriction has been imposed as per Article 19, Clause 2. Now, let us look into the reasonability of the restriction. Once the ground is fixed, now reasonability of the restriction has to be inquired into. The court concluded that two basic principles must be borne in mind while inquiring into the reasonability of a restriction imposed under Article 19, Clause 2. First, newspapers enjoy the benefit of government services like all other industries and must accordingly contribute a reasonable share of government revenue through taxation. And second, the burden of taxation must not be excessive. If there is an excessive taxation, then reasonability of the restriction shall be inquired into. In the context of the present petition, the court observed that the excessive nature of the burden was neither adequately proven by the petitioners nor adequately refuted by the respondents. It stated that a strict burden of proof need not be discharged, considering the possibility of the interference with the fundamental rights. It therefore directed the government to re examine the taxation policy by evaluating whether it constituted an excessive burden on the newspapers. But government was not happy with the directions of the apex court. According to them, such consideration is irrelevant and incorrect because the notification is already well within the ambit of Article 19, Clause 2. But again, since directions were issued, the notification had to be revised by taking this factor into consideration. Important point one should note down with reference to this case is the court differed from the Hamdard Dawakana ruling. In this case, the court observed that all commercial advertisements cannot be denied protection under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A, merely because they are issued by businessmen. By this judgment, the story of choosing between right to press and right to trade concludes to an extent. Now, coming to the cases dealing with prior restraint and pre-censorship over the freedom of press. Reliance Petrochemicals Limited versus Proprietors of Indian Express Newspapers, Bombay Private Limited, AER 1989 SC 190. The facts of the case are as follows. Primarily, the case of Reliance, which is pending before Supreme Court, is a case related to company law. We'll not go into the main case. Now, the facts of this case is, meanwhile, Reliance Petrochemical Limited sued the proprietors of the Indian Express newspaper against the article published by them on August 25th, 1988, to the effect that the controller of capital issues had not acted properly and legally in granting the sanction to the issue, and that the issue was not a prudent or a reliable venture. The petitioner moved the court for initiating contempt proceedings against the respondent for alleged interference with the due administration of justice by publication of an article commenting on a matter which is sub judice. The petitioner also sought injunction against the threatened or expected publication of similar comments. The court first issued an order of injunction restraining publication of articles, that is, questioning the legality or validity of any of the consents, approvals, or permissions for the public issue. The Indian Express contended against the order of the Apex Court that pre-stoppage of newspaper article or a publication on matters of public importance was uncalled for and contrary to freedom of press enshrined in the Indian Constitution. Public had a right to know about the issue of debentures, which was a matter of public concern, and the newspapers had an obligation to inform, and that there was no jury trial in India, hence no likelihood of trial being prejudiced because trial was by professionally trained judges. Reliance Petrochemicals contended that there was an inherent jurisdiction to restrain by injunction any publication that interfered with a fair trial of a pending case or with the administration of justice in general. Hence, this inherent power of the court can impose restrictions upon the freedom of press unless the final judgment is not out. The court disposed the application for the continuance of the injunction filed by the Reliance Petrochemicals on the following grounds. Freedom of speech and expression is not absolute. Judiciary is not independent unless courts of justice are enabled to administer law by absence of pressure from without, whether exerted through the blandishments of reward or the menace of disfavor. The law of contempt must be judged in a particular situation. A balance has to be struck between the requirements of free press and free trial. Balance of convenience is the proper test to follow. That's what court has laid down. The test is whether there was a present and imminent danger of for the issue or continuance of injunction. The sole purpose of the restraint issued by the court shall be to keep the administration of justice unimpaired. It is the limitation upon the court to use this inherent power to restrict the freedom of press. Unless and until there is no present and imminent danger, the court cannot, that is also by keeping in mind the administration of justice, then only the court can impose restrictions. Danger apprehended shall be imminent and real. By applying the doctrine of proportionality, the court inquired into the question, is there any loss of public interest by restraining the freedom of press or by permitting the freedom of press? If loss is there in either of the cases, then that particular case which is causing the loss of the public interest can be restrained under Article 19 Clause 2. Damage to administration of justice comes under the ambit of reasonable restrictions, that is the contempt of court. Finally, the court held that any preventive injunction against the press must be based on reasonable grounds for keeping the administration of justice unimpaired, and that there must be reasonable ground to believe that the danger apprehended is real and imminent. Now coming to the most important case, R. Rajagopal versus State of Tamil Nadu, AR 1995 SC 264. This case is also known as Auto Shankar case. Before going into the facts, let me explain the importance of this case. This case raised the question of right to privacy under Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A and also introduced the concept of civil defamation. Now going to the facts of the case, Auto Shankar was convicted of 6 murders and sentenced to death. He is alleged to be having high-profile relationship with politicians who are in power in state of Tamil Nadu and also with the opposition party leaders. Petitioners who are the editor, associate editor, printer and publisher of a Tamil magazine Nakiran approached Auto Shankar and sought his permission to publish his autobiography. Auto Shankar also wished to publish his autobiography. Before releasing the autobiography of Auto Shankar, the petitioner's magazine Nakiran announced the publication. Though facts in this case do not state, but the newspaper reports provided that Auto Shankar autobiography is going to create turmoil in the Tamil Nadu politics. According to the petitioners, the respondents, including the state of Tamil Nadu, the Inspector General of Prisons, and the Superintendent of Prisons, made Auto Shankar write a letter to the Nakiran to revoke his consent in publishing the autobiography. Petitioners then brought this action to prevent the respondents from violating the magazines and the prisoners' freedom of expression. State of Tamil Nadu argued that the said publication affects the right to privacy of many persons whose name was mentioned in the so-called publication. Coming to the judgment part, the court considered this case as right to privacy versus right to freedom of speech and expression. First, court attempted to deliberate upon right to privacy. According to court, there are two categories in tort of right to privacy. First, protection against unlawful invasion of privacy of a person by an individual action. Second, protection against unlawful invasion of privacy against unlawful governmental invasion. According to court, here the respondents are arguing for unlawful invasion of right to privacy of a person by an individual action, that is by Auto Shankar's biography. Petitioners are contending that restraining autobiography in the name of protecting the privacy of those whose names are mentioned is a governmental interference against the freedom of press. The court explained that it was important to strike a balance between the freedom of press and the right to privacy. The court found that the state and its officials do not have the right to impose prior restraints on the publication of materials that may be defamatory of the state. Therefore, no such prior restraint or prohibition of publication can be imposed by the respondents upon the proposed publication of the alleged autobiography. Here, the most important thing to observe is the court noted that this ruling does not mean that the state cannot sue for defamation after the article is published, only that they cannot place a prior restraint or pre-censorship on the publication of the article. That means, after publication of the autobiography, if the content is defamatory in nature, affecting the reputation of the government, then government can sue the Nakiran through civil defamation suit. Applying the above principles, the court held that the petitioner have a right to publish what they allege to be life story or autobiography of Auto Shankar, insofar as it appears from the public records even without his consent or authorization. But if they go beyond that and publish his life story, they may be invading his right to privacy and will be liable for the consequences in accordance with law if Auto Shankar did not consent for that publication. Similarly, the state or its officials cannot prevent or restrain the said publication. The remedy of the affected public officials or public figures, if any, is after the publication, that is, they can go for civil defamation case. One of the important features of this case is that the Supreme Court recognized the regime of civil defamation. According to court, under this regime of civil defamation, the maker of a defamatory suit, defamatory statement, bore the burden of proving its truth. That is, the one who published the defamatory statement is liable to prove that the statement is based on the truth. Further, the court in this case also fixed the responsibility on the person alleging defamation, stating that he should prove that the maker of the defamatory statement either knew it to be false or made the statement recklessly. This creates a duty upon the maker of the defamatory statement to self-censor before publishing anything, and a duty upon the person alleging defamation to prove that the said statement is made by the maker not under honest mistake or mistake done after all due care. Rather, it is a clear false statement made with full knowledge and consciousness. There was no let-off for honest mistakes or mistakes made even after all due care had been taken. This is called the Sullivan Doctrine or Chilling Effect Doctrine, laid down by the US Supreme Court in New York Times versus Sullivan. According to court, free speech needs breathing space to survive, that is, freedom to make mistakes. But if mistakes are done intentionally or without due care, then civil defamation case can be filed against such false statements. However, Rajgopal judgment ruled only about the civil defamation, and according to the judgment, the civil defamation is now subjected to rigorous conditions but limits to the truthfulness of the statement only. According to Rajgopal judgment, it is not required to prove that the said statement is made in the public interest. Coming to the criminal defamation part, the accused must not simply prove that his statement is true, but he also had to prove that it was made in the public interest. So this is the context or the practice which is followed in the criminal defamation cases. In Rajagopalan only, with reference to the civil defamation, the court held that the impugned statement is not required to be proved on the context of public interest. Now coming to the Tata Press versus MTNL case. If you recollect, in the days of landline telephone services, there used to be telephone directory arranged in alphabetical order, area wise, with phone numbers and addresses of the telephone subscribers. MTNL published such telephone directory for the convenience of its telephone subscribers. Tata Press published the telephone directory in the name of Yellow Pages by compiling the information provided in the MTNL telephone directory. Yellow Pages also consisted of the commercial advertisement. Rule 458 of the Telegraph Act, Telegraph Rules 1951, prohibited the publication of a list of telephone subscribers without the permission of the Telegraph Authority. It was alleged that this violated Rule 4, the Act of the Tata Press violated Rule 458, since MTNL's telephone directory and Yellow Pages published by Tata Press are something almost identical. The writ was filed in the High Court. The High Court found that in substance and in purpose, the Yellow Pages amounted to a telephone directory, and therefore their publication contravened Rule 458. In appeal before the Supreme Court, one of the key contentions of the appellant was that commercial speech was protected under Article 19 Clause 1A, notwithstanding the seemingly contrary decision in Hamdard Davakhana. But court in this case held that Hamdard Davakhana judgment prohibited only a kind of advertisements which are mentioned in the Drugs and Magic Remedies Objectionable Advertisement Act from the purview of Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A, and was not authority for a general proposition excluding commercial speech from constitutional protection. While ruling so, the court relied upon the Indian Express Newspapers versus Union of India case. The court in this case held that advertisements were protected under Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A, while deceptive, unfair, misleading and untruthful commercial speech would be hit by Article 19 Clause 2, presumably by the morality provision. The court then found three justifications for protecting commercial speech. First, advertisements were essential towards keeping prices down in the market economy. Secondly, advertisements provided a crucial source of revenue to newspapers, and a free media was the lifeblood of democracy. And thirdly, by maintaining the free flow of information, advertisements were necessary for consumers to make an informed choice. With these justifications, the court attempted to bring nexus between financial requirements of a media house and freedom of press. When media houses are financially strong, then only they can disseminate information free of cost. Without financial strength, media houses cannot run, and if media houses don't run, there is no existence of democracy in the country. Reading Rule 458 of the Telegraph Rules, in light of these findings, the court held in favor of Tata Press. While doing so, the court made 2 points. First, the court has to be careful not to depart from the democratic justification of Sakal papers while dealing with the freedom of speech and expression and vis-a-vis democracy. The three justifications explained just now brings the democracy and market economy together to protect the freedom of press. According to the court, the ruling of Hamdard Dawakana actually expanded the scope of commercial speech vis-a-vis freedom of press. As per Hamdard Dawakana ruling, commercial speech need not to prove the public interest involving dissemination of social, political or cultural ideas. The advertisements which are purely commercial also can be brought under the ambit of Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A. This has been done by allowing an indirect causal connection between the impugned speech and the overall maintenance and sustenance of democracy. It is an open question then whether the democratic justification, when read so broadly, then imposing restrictions on freedom of press is possible or not. The court again reiterated that the fundamental freedom of press guaranteed under Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A is not absolute and is subjected to the reasonable restrictions laid down under Article 19 Clause 2. Second point is there is an undeniable conflict between Hamdard Dawakana and Tata Press. The former made it clear that misleading advertisements were not protected by Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A, whereas the latter makes it equally clear that they are and are further hit by Article 19 Clause 2. Hamdard Dawakana was a constitutional bench decision and Tata Press was decided by a bench of two judges. There is no doubt that the finding in question was part of the ratio in Hamdard Dawakana, excluding the observation that commercial speech does not fall within the ambit of Article 19 Clause 1A was not. Now, finally, in this case, the Supreme Court held in favor of Yellow Pages. It stated that the printing of a telephone directory of telephone subscribers is to be done exclusively by the telephone department as part of its service to the telephone subscribers. Yellow Pages contains commercial advertisements along with the telephone numbers of the telephone subscribers, which is protected under Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A. Now coming to the case, Secretary, Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Government of India and others versus Cricket Association of Bengal and others, AER 1995 SC 1236. Cricket Association of Bengal, who is the organizer of the cricket matches, wanted to hand over the broadcasting rights to the private players. Government of India imposed restrictions upon such act of Cricket Association of Bengal. The issue is whether broadcasters' right is a fundamental right protected under Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A. First of all, in India, organizing event itself is part of Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A. When something is part of freedom of speech and expression, then automatically restrictions laid down under Article 19 Clause 2 will be operative upon them. Broadcasting is a type of dissemination of information. If so, it is included under Article 19 Clause 1A and then same becomes subject to Article 19 Clause 2. As broadcasting is subject to restrictions laid down under Article 19 Clause 2, state can impose restrictions upon broadcasting. The court here had to inquire into the nature of the restrictions and its reasonability. First, coming to the nature of restrictions, the impugned legislative or executive action should fall under any one of the grounds mentioned under Article 19 Clause 2. Second, if the restrictions falls under any one of the ground, then inquire into the reasonability of the restriction. And now look at the nature of the restriction. The court questioned whether the permission to uplink to the foreign satellite, the signal created by the CAB or BCCI, either by itself or through its agency, can be refused except on the grounds stated in the law made under Article 19 Clause 2. This is the case where the court attempted to include right to information under the ambit of Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A. According to the court, there is an obvious connection between the press freedom and freedom of speech, as the press is the medium for broadcasting information and opinion. In support of its statement, the court laid down the following points. Firstly, media freedom as a tool of self-expression is a significant instrument of personal autonomy. Secondly, as a channel of communication, it helps to allow the political discourse in a democracy. Thirdly, it helps to provide one of the essential conditions in scholarships, making possible the exchange and evaluation of theories, explanations, and discoveries. And lastly, It helps to promulgate a society's cultural values and facilitates the debate about them, advancing the development and survival of civilization. The Apex Court mined the right to information from out of the depths of the Article 19, and this right was fleshed with the right to acquire information and to disseminate information. The court significantly held that freedom of press included right to circulate and to determine the volume of circulation. The court further held that right to communicate included the right to communicate through any media, whether print, electronic, or audiovisual, or internet. Finally, the court held that the restrictions imposed by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting did not fall under any of the categories mentioned under Article 19, Clause 2. Hence, Ministry do not have power to restrict the BCCI in enjoying their freedom to disseminate information by providing any foreign satellite agency through broadcasting the event. Now coming to the next case, that is Sahara India Real Estate Corporation Limited versus SEBI, 2012-10 SEC 603. It is a case concerning media trial versus administration of justice. This case is similar to that of Reliance Petrochemicals case. As the Sahara India case is known to all, I am skipping the background of the case. The important issue in this case is whether press can be restrained from publishing court proceedings on the ground of real and substantial risk of prejudice to the proper administration of justice or to the fairness of trial. Sahara in this case contended that the publication and news reporting about the pending case is creating the prejudice in the minds of the judges, causing damage to fair trial. Refer to the 2200th report of the Law Commission of India on Trial by Media, Free Speech and Fair Trial under CRPC, published in the year 2006 for a detailed study about media trial vis-a-vis freedom of press. The court in this case held that freedom of press was not restricted to expression of thoughts and ideas which were accepted and acceptable, but also to those which offended or shocked by any section of the population. Freedom of speech and expression included the right to receive information and ideas of all kinds from different sources and embodied the right to know. The court in Sahara case applied the real and substantial risk of prejudice test to decide whether failure to injunct the publication would create a real and substantial risk of prejudice to the proper administration of justice or to the fairness of trial. Hence, court said media reports as do not pose real and substantial risk of prejudice. There is no requirement of imposing restrictions on media reporting about Sahara case. Further, the court in this case held that there is huge chunk of common man who are victims of Sahara issue and awaiting for their money to be returned back. They all have the vested interest in the case and they all want to know what is happening about in the case on day-to-day basis. They have right to know what is the update about the case. Hence, the impact of media has been observed to be part of freedom of speech and expression. The court in this case permitted the newspapers to publish the day-to-day proceedings of the Sahara case and held that it is not violating the administration of justice or the fairness of trial. This media trial story can be observed in full swing in the cases like Jessica Lal, Priyadarshini Mattu, Nitish Katera, BMW, Arushi Talwar, etc. Arushi Talwar's murder case, etc. Now coming to the another story, that is Shreya Singhal versus Union of India, 2013-12 SEC 7-3. You all know the case a lot, so I am not going to talk much about the facts. Just to introduce, in this case, Section 66A of the IT Act 2000 was declared as unconstitutional against Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A. It is one of the important cases with reference to the freedom of speech and expression. The facts of the case are as follows. Police arrested 2 women for posting allegedly offensive and objectionable comments on Facebook about the propriety of shutting down the city of Mumbai after the death of political leader Bal Thackeray. Under Section 66A of the IT Act 2000, Punishment can be provided for sending information that is grossly offensive or false information through a computer resource or communication device with an intent to cause annoyance, inconvenience, danger, insult, injury, hatred, or ill will. Although the police later released the women and dismissed their prosecution, the incident invoked substantial media attention and criticism. The woman then filed a petition challenging the constitutional validity of Section 66A on the ground that it violated the freedom of speech and expression. The case in hand provided the opportunity for the court to deliver a historical judgment. The court in this case addressed the constitutionality of the provision. The main issue was whether Section 66A of the IT Act violated the right to freedom of expression guaranteed under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A of the Constitution. As an exception to the right, Article 19, Clause 2 permits the government to impose reasonable restrictions. The petitioners argued that Section 66A was unconstitutional because its intended protection against annoyance, inconvenience, danger, obstruction, insult, injury, criminal intimidation, or ill will fall outside the purview of Article 19, Clause 2. They also argued that law was unconstitutionally vague as it fails to specify or define the prohibitions properly. In addition, they contended that the law has a chilling effect on the freedom of speech and expression. The government, on the other hand, argued that the legislature is in the best position to fulfill the needs of the people, and courts may interfere with legislative process only when a statute is clearly violative of the rights conferred on the citizens under Part 3 of the Constitution. The government further contended that mere presence of abuse of a provision may not be a ground to declare the provision unconstitutional. Also, the government was of the opinion that loose language of the law could not be a ground for invalidity because the law is concerned with novel methods of disturbing people's rights through internet. According to the government, vagueness cannot be a ground to declare a statute unconstitutional if the statute is otherwise legislatively competent and non-arbitrary. Now, coming to the judgment part, the court first discussed three fundamental concepts in understanding the freedom of speech and expression, that is, discussion, advocacy, and incitement. According to the court, mere discussion or even advocacy of a particular cause, howsoever unpopular, is at the heart of the right to freedom of speech and expression. And the law, according to the court, mere discussion or even advocacy of a particular cause, howsoever unpopular, is at the heart of the right to freedom of speech and expression. The court found that Section 66A is capable of limiting all forms of internet communications as it makes no distinction between mere discussion or advocacy of a particular point of view, which may be annoying or inconvenient or grossly offensive to some, and incitement by which such words lead to an imminent causal connection with public disorder, security of state, etc. The court further held that the law fails to establish a clear proximate relation to the protection of public order. According to the court, the commission of an offence under Section 66A is complete by sending a message for the purpose of causing annoyance or insult. As a result, the law does not make distinction between mass dissemination and dissemination to only one person without requiring the message to have a clear tendency of disrupting public order. As to whether Section 66A was a valid attempt to protect individuals from defamatory statements through online communications, the court noted that the main ingredient of defamation is injury to reputation. It held that the law does not concern this objective because it also condemns offensive statements that may annoy or be inconvenient to an individual without affecting his reputation. The court in this case also held that the government failed to show that the law intends to prevent communications that incite the commission of an offense because the mere causing of annoyance, inconvenience, danger, etc., are being grossly offensive or having a menacing character are not offenses under the penal code at all. As to petitioners' challenge of vagueness, the court followed the US judicial precedent, which holds that where no reasonable standards are laid down to define guilt in a section which creates an offense, and where no clear guidance is given to either law abiding citizens or to authorities and courts, a section which creates an offense and which is vague must be struck down as being arbitrary and unreasonable. Finally, the court in this case found that section 66A leaves many terms open-ended and undefined, therefore making the statute void for vagueness. The court also addressed whether section 66A is capable of imposing chilling effect on the right to freedom of speech and expression. The court held that because the provision fails to define terms such as inconvenience or annoyance, a very large amount of protected and innocent speech could be curtailed. Based on the foregoing reasons, the court invalidated Section 66A of the IT Act in its entirety as it violated the freedom of speech and expression guaranteed under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A. Now coming to the next case, Swatantra Kumar versus the Indian Express Limited. It is a case in which a pre-publication restraint order was passed against reporting the name or photograph and without giving his side of the story. In this case, the plaintiff was a former judge of the Supreme Court, and by virtue of his holding of a past office, he was under an obligation not to have publicly refuted the allegations made against him. Hence, the court issued the pre-publication restraint order in this case. Now coming to the Subramania Swamy versus Union of India, this judgment was delivered after Shreya single judgment. To recollect, in R. Rajgopal, that is Auto Shankar case, I explained you about the application of civil defamation against Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A. And there only the chilling effect doctrine was introduced in relation with the civil defamation. In this case, the court elaboratively dealt with criminal defamation vis-a-vis chilling effect doctrine. In 2014, Dr. Subramania Swamy made corruption allegations against Ms. Jayalalitha. In response, the Tamil Nadu state government filed defamation cases against Dr. Swamy. Thereafter, numerous petitions were filed under Article 32 of the Constitution of India challenging the constitutional validity of the offence of criminal defamation as provided for in sections 499 and 500 of the IPC and sections 199 clause 1 to clause 4 of the Indian Code of Criminal Procedure 1973. Several of the petitioners such as Subramania Swamy, Rahul Gandhi and Arvind Kejriwal, who had been charged with criminal defamation cases, contested the constitutional validity of the offence of criminal defamation and argued that it inhibited the right to freedom of speech and expression. The criminal proceedings against them had been stayed pending the constitutional proceedings. Now coming to section 499 and 500 of the IPC. Section 499 defines defamation and section 500 prescribes the punishment. Defamation is defined as spoken or written words or visible representations concerning any person intended to harm his or her reputation. Exceptions to this include an imputation of truth required for a public good or the conduct of any person touching any public question or expressing opinions on a public performance. Challenge before the court was twofold. First, whether criminalizing defamation is an excessive restriction on freedom of speech. Second, whether the criminal defamation law under sections 499 and 500 of IPC is vaguely phrased and hence arbitrary. The court in this case analyzed the criminal defamation versus freedom of speech and expression in detail. The judgment begins by analyzing the meaning of the terms defamation and reputation and the interaction of these terms with right of the freedom of speech and expression. The court found that the term was clear and unambiguous. The court also found that the concept of reputation was included in the protection of dignity, which was part of the constitutionally protected right to life. The code also recognized the sanctity and significance of the right to freedom of speech and expression in a democracy, but pointed out that it is subject to reasonable restrictions. According to court, such restrictions imposed on freedom of speech and expression should serve the public interest and should not be excessive. Legislation by which restrictions are enacted should not invade the rights and should not be arbitrary. The balance is to be achieved by weighing the importance to society of freedom of speech against the societal importance to the public interest sought to be protected. The court observed that the state had chosen the criminal law as one of the avenues through which it can protect the reputation of persons. Noting that reputation is protected under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, which protects life and liberty, the court found that it was difficult to subscribe to the view that criminal defamation has an undue chilling effect on the freedom of speech and expression. The court went on to emphasize the importance of the concepts of constitutional fraternity and fundamental duty, under which every citizen is expected to respect the dignity of the other. That is, doctrine of constitutional morality vis-a-vis individual's duty laid down under the Constitution. Noting that this is a constitutional duty, the court held that it could not conclude that the existence of criminal defamation is obnoxious to freedom of speech and expression. The important question dealt by the court in this case is whether the criminal defamation provisions violate the concept of reasonableness, either substantively or procedurally, examining whether it is vague or arbitrary or disproportionate. Examining the four explanations included in the IPC provisions on defamation, the court concluded that these were neither vague nor ambiguous. The court took note that an imputation can only be treated as defamatory if it directly or indirectly, in the estimation of others, lowers a person's character or his credit. The court took note that truth is a defense only when a statement also serves the public good, but opines that if a truthful statement is not made for any kind of public good, but only to malign a person, this should not be constitutionally protected. Finally, the court held that the penal code provision is not disproportionate. The reasonableness and proportionality of a restriction is examined from the standpoint of the interest of the general public and not from the standpoint of the person upon whom the restrictions are imposed. Applying this standard, the court judged that criminal defamation laws are proportionate to the reasonable restrictions required to be imposed on freedom of speech and expression. The criticism of this judgment is that the Subramania Swamy judgment is per incurium because of its failure to consider the ratio of R. Rajgopal versus State of Tamil Nadu, that is, the finding that a regime of no fault liability in defamation causes the chilling effect upon free speech. So this is one of the criticism. Next, in R. Rajgopal's case, the Supreme Court modified the common law of civil defamation by applying the chilling effect doctrine by replacing the no fault liability standard. But one thing to note is R. Rajgopal case dealt with application of chilling effect in civil defamation cases only, as I already explained, and the application of chilling effect in criminal defamation cases are left open for interpretation. Hence, we cannot say that there is a conflict between R. Rajgopal judgment and the Subramania Swamy judgment. For this reason, Subramania Swamy's finding that criminal defamation's no fault liability does not chill speech is reached in ignorance of Rajgopal and is therefore per incurium. That's what the critics say. But as I already explained, since Rajgopal judgment deals with civil defamation and chilling effect and left open the criminal defamation for the future interpretation, Subramania Swamy, according to me, is not in direct conflict with Rajgopal. In common law, a judgment, what is per incurium? In common law, a judgment that is per incurium has no legal force or validity and does not count as precedent. Classically, per incurium is a very narrow concept applicable only in two circumstances, that is, when a judgment is passed in ignorance of a relevant statutory provision. Second, without considering binding precedent of a coordinate or larger bench. Chilling effect doctrine was also applied in the case Ram Jetmalani versus Subramania Swamy, year 2006, Delhi 300, Delhi High Court judgment. The Delhi High Court observed if a person is under fear of being sued, he may not express himself freely on public issues, and this would chill the public debate. The other case where chilling effect doctrine was applied by the Delhi High Court is M.K. Sharma versus Sangeeta Gupta. In this case is a complex factual matrix, but in essence, the court in this case held that statements made to an investigating committee set up under the aegis of the Vishaka guidelines on sexual harassment cannot be subject to a defamation suit, since this would inevitably having a chilling effect, thus deterring an aggrieved person from availing of a remedy provided by the Supreme Court against sexual harassment. Coming to the next case, in Naveen Jindal versus G Media Corporation Limited 2015, again the Delhi High Court judgment. The Delhi High Court in this case held that the power of the High Court to order restraint of publication in the media would clearly encompass the stage when the criminal case against the accused is at the preliminary inquiry or investigation stage. Here, injunction was granted as investigation was sought to be influenced in as much as the investigating officer was sought to be interrogated or interviewed on television. Comparing Swatantra Kumar case with Naveen Jindal versus G Media Corporation Limited case, we can see that plaintiff was in this case, the plaintiff was in Swatantra Kumar case, the plaintiff was a former judge of the Supreme Court, and by virtue of his holding of the past office, he was under an obligation not to have publicly refuted the allegations made against him. But in Naveen Jindal case, the plaintiff was an MP on 2 occasions and he had ample opportunity to address the public, hold a press conference and give his side of the story. Hence, the present scenario is, in reporting ongoing cases, courts now insist on a disclaimer that the matter is still sub judice or final decision in the case is still awaited. In R.K. Pachori sexual harassment case also, the court ordered that any telecasting of interview or coverage or reporting or comment should include a subtitle, that is, in any court the allegations have not been proved and they may not be correct. This is how court tried to regulate the media trial. The next case is Dr. Shashi Tharoor versus Arnav Goswami and another. It is also a case with regard to media trial. You can understand it by reading the title of the case. In this case, it was held that one of the permissible heads of restriction on freedom of speech and expression is defamation, and for a claim of defamation to succeed, a public figure has to prove additionally that the representation was precipitated by malice. The court in this case applied the two-pronged test of necessity and proportionality. According to court, the test of necessity and proportionality have to be satisfied before ordering postponement of publication, namely necessity to prevent real and substantial risk to fairness of trial, and salutary effect of such an injunction outweighs deleterious effect to the free expression. Now coming to Anuradha Bhasin versus Union of India and Ghulam Nabi Azad versus Union of India. This case was decided on January 10, 2020 by the Supreme Court of India. You know the facts of the case clearly. Jammu and Kashmir is subject of a decades-long dispute between India and Pakistan. On August 5th, 2019, the Indian government issued Constitution Application to Jammu and Kashmir Order 2019, which revoked special status to Jammu and Kashmir. To control the situation at the ground level, government imposed restrictions on online communication and freedom of movement. Mobile phone networks, internet services, landline connectivity were all shut down in the region. The district magistrates imposed restrictions on freedoms of movement and public assembly under Section 144 of the CRPC. The internet shutdown and movement restriction of journalists to travel and publish was challenged in court for their violation of Article 19. The petition was brought by Ms. Anuradha Bhasin, the editor of the Kashmir Times Srinagar edition. She argued that internet is essential for the modern press and that by shutting it down, the authorities forced the print media to come to a grinding halt. She also argued that the government failed to consider whether the internet shutdown was reasonable and proportionate to the aims it pursued. She argued that the restrictions were passed on the belief that there would be a danger to law and order, which is not a ground mentioned under Article 19, Clause 2. The petitioner, Mr. Ghulam Nabi Azad, argued that restrictions must be based on objective reasons and not merely on inferences. Further, Mr. Ghulam Nabi Azad argued that restrictions on movement must be specific in scope, targeting those who may disturb the peace, and cannot be applied broadly against the public in general. When imposing restrictions, the state must choose the least restrictive measures and balance the safety of people with their lawful exercise of their fundamental rights, which did not occur in the case of Jammu and Kashmir. According to Ghulam Nabi Azad, concerning internet restrictions didn't merely affect freedom of expression but also the right to trade as well as the ability of political representatives to communicate with their constituencies. The Attorney General argued that the restrictions were a measure to prevent terrorist acts and were justified considering the history of cross-border terrorism and internal militancy that had long plagued this state of Jammu and Kashmir. The Solicitor General reiterated the historical necessity argument and noted that a state's first and foremost duty is to ensure security and protect their citizens' lives. He also argued that the facts laid down by the petitioners were false and exaggerated the effects of the restrictions. He said that individual movement had never been restricted, that restrictions were imposed only in certain areas and were relaxed soon after, and that all newspapers, television, and radio channels were functioning. Concerning the communications and internet shutdown, the Solicitor General submitted that the internet was never restricted in Jammu and Ladakh regions. He added that social media, which allowed people to send messages and communicate with a number of people at the same time, could be used as a means to incite violence. Hence, in some parts of the Jammu and Kashmir only, it is banned. According to him, the internet allowed for the transmission of false news or fake image, which were then used to spread violence, only was restricted. Further, he claimed that the dark web allowed individuals to purchase weapons and illegal substances easily. Hence, to control the terrorist activities and any sort of internal disturbance which may emerge in the light of the revocation of the special status to Jammu and Kashmir, he said that some restrictions are required to be imposed in certain areas upon internet. Further, he explained that while newspapers only allowed one-way communication, the internet made it possible to communicate in both directions, making dissemination of messages very simply. Hence, he concluded by saying that it was not possible to ban only certain websites or parts of the internet while allowing access to other parts, as the government with the previous riots and so on forth happened in Jammu and Kashmir. The court then identified 5 issues from the arguments presented by the petitioners and the government. That is, first, whether the government can claim exemption from producing all of the restriction orders. Second, whether freedom of speech and expression and freedom to practice any profession or to carry on any occupation, trade or business over the internet is a part of the fundamental rights protected by Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A and Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause G of the Constitution, whether the government's action of prohibiting internet access is valid, whether the imposition of movement restrictions under Section 144 of the CRPC was valid, whether the freedom of press of the petitioner in writ petition number 1031 of 2019 was violated due to restrictions. Now coming to the judgment part. The Supreme Court began by stating that, in light of the facts of the present case, the objective of the court was to strike a balance between liberty and security concerns so that the right to life is secured and enjoyed in the best possible manner. With regard to the first issue, that is whether the government can claim exemption from producing all the orders for the restrictions, the court held that, first of all, to proceed in this case, state had to produce the so-called secrecy orders imposing restrictions, and stated that it is difficult to judge the case in the absence of those orders. In this regard, court referred Ram Jethmalani versus Union of India case and held that state had an obligation to disclose information in order to satisfy the right to remedy as established in Article 32 of the Indian Constitution. Further, Article 19 of the Indian Constitution had been interpreted to include right to information as an important part of right to freedom of speech and expression. So, court said that disclosure of the information or the state orders is essential. The court further added that a democracy includes transparency and accountability, and no law should be passed in secret because of an anticipated danger to democracy. Coming to the second issue, did the restrictions affect freedom of movement, freedom of speech and expression, and right to freedom of trade and commerce? With regard to this issue, first court said that Article 19 Clause 1A includes right to access internet. Hence, could only be restricted under Article 19 Clause 2 of the Constitution. Accordingly, the internet also plays a very important role in trade and commerce, also constitutionally protected under Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause Z and subject to reasonable restrictions later under Article 19 Clause 6. By reviewing its jurisprudence concerning the application of Article 19 Clause 2, the court in this case concluded that restrictions on free speech and expression could impose complete prohibitions. That is, the state is empowered to impose complete prohibitions under Article 19 Clause 2. But while imposing complete prohibition, state has to prove that there is no excessiveness in the state action while curtailing the freedom of speech and expression. The court has to explain why lesser alternatives would be inadequate and prove that complete restriction is in proportion to the required damage control. Now, examining the excessiveness of the complete restriction, the court held that, keeping in view the geopolitical context of the Jammu and Kashmir terrorism and using of internet for carrying out the terrorist activities, the government's restriction on freedom of speech and expression, that is banning internet in the given context, is in proportion to the damage which the government wants to regulate. Now, coming to the application of doctrine of proportionality to the present context, the court expressed caution at balancing national security with liberty and rejected the notion that a government should be prohibited from achieving a public good at the cost of fundamental rights. With this in mind, the court defined proportionality as the question of whether regulating exercise of fundamental rights, the appropriate or least restrictive choice of measures has been made by the legislature or the administrator so as to achieve the object of the legislation or the purpose of the administrative order, as the case may be. According to court, proportionality was the key tool to achieve judicial balance when resolving questions of restriction on fundamental rights. There was no agreement that proportionality and balancing were equivalent. The court then outlined its understanding of the test of proportionality in the light of the following points. First, the goal of restriction must be legitimate. Second, the restriction must be necessary. Third, the authorities must consider if alternative measures to the restrictions exist. Fourth, the least restrictive measure must be taken. Fifth, the last one, the restriction must be open to judicial review. The court added that the degree of restriction and the scope of the same, both territorially and temporally, must stand in relation to what is actually necessary to combat an emergent situation. The concept of proportionality requires a restriction to be tailored in accordance with the territorial extent of the restriction, the stage of emergency, nature of urgency, duration of such restrictive measure, and the nature of such restriction. Coming to the third issue, that is the legality of the internet shutdown. While dealing with this issue, the court outrightly rejected the state's justification for a total ban on the internet because it lacked the technology to selectively block internet services, as accepting such logic would have given the state green light to completely ban internet access every time. But court took into account the fact that internet is used to propagate terrorism, thereby challenging the sovereignty and integrity of India, a ground mentioned under Article 19, Clause 2. The restrictions are validated by the court. Public availability of a government order is a settled principle of law and a natural justice, particularly if an order affects lives, liberty, and property of people, as later while dealing with the first issue. A complete broad suspension of telecom services, be it the internet or otherwise, being a drastic measure, must be considered by the state only if necessary and unavoidable. In furtherance of this aim, the state must access the existence of an alternative less intrusive remedy, as laid down by the court in the second issue. Third, considering the principle of proportionality, the court opined that indefinite suspension is impermissible, as laid down in this particular issue. While holding so, the court looked into the fourth issue, restrictions under Section 144 of the Criminal Procedure Code. The court noted that Section 144 is one of the mechanisms that enable the state to maintain public peace, and it could be invoked in urgent cases of nuisance or perceived danger. Thus, it allows the state to take preventive measures to deal with imminent threats to public peace. This section contains several safeguards to prevent its abuse, including an assessment by a magistrate to conclude that there were sufficient grounds for restrictions under this section, identification of a person's whose rights may be restricted, and determining the length of the restriction. Judicial precedent established that restrictions under Section 144 cannot be imposed merely because there was likelihood or tendency of danger, but only to immediately prevent specific acts that may lead to danger. The restriction could be imposed on an entire area if it contains groups of people disturbing public order. Indefinite restrictions under Section 144 are unconstitutional, as I already explained. Orders passed under Section 144 were executive orders subject to judicial review under Section 226 of the Constitution. The state cannot impose repetitive orders, which would be an abuse of power. Further, the Supreme Court agreed that the notions of public order and law and order are different, with the latter being the broadest. The court described the differences as concentric circles, with law and order representing the larger circle, within which is the next circle representing public order, and the smallest circle represents security of the state. Allowing the imposition of restrictions to protect law and order would thus broaden the authority of the government to impose restrictions. Further, not all disturbances of law and order undermines public order. The court, however, agreed that there may be times when it is impossible to distinguish between the individuals who may break public order and those who do not pose a threat. Nevertheless, the court noted that orders passed under Section 144 CRPC have direct consequences upon the fundamental rights of the public in general. Such a power, if used in a causal and cavalier manner, would result in severe illegality. A key consideration is the perceived imminence of the threat and whether invoked Section 144 was the proper remedy to prevent potential harm. Thus, the court concluded that the power under Section 144 could be exercised not only where there exists present danger, but also when there is an apprehension of danger. However, the danger contemplated should be in the nature of an emergency and for the purpose of preventing obstruction and annoyance or injury to any person lawfully employed. The power cannot be used to suppress legitimate expression and should be used only in the presence of material facts justifying its application. Coming to the last issue, freedom of the press. The court interpreted that the imposed restrictions did not necessarily have a direct but rather an indirect as well as chilling effect on their freedom of speech and expression. However, the court found that the petitioners failed to offer evidence that the restrictions restricted the publishing of newspapers in Jammu and Kashmir are the challenge are to challenge the state's argument that newspapers were published and distributed during the communication and movement lockdown. Now, coming on to the conclusions of the case, basing upon the arguments presented by the petitioners and respondents, the court finally concluded that freedom of expression and the freedom to practice any profession online was protected by India's constitution. Although the governments could suspend the internet, the government had to prove necessity and impose a temporal limit, which it failed to do in this case. Thus, the government had to review its suspension orders and lift those that were not necessary or did not have a temporal limit. Restrictions laid down under Section 144 of the CRPC could not be used to suppress legitimate expression and are subject to judicial scrutiny. The court thus ordered the state to review its restrictions. Coming to the latest ongoing controversies with reference to the freedom of press are Arnav Goswami case. Republic TV's editor-in-chief Arnav Goswami has moved the Supreme Court under Article 32 of the Constitution for the protection of Goswami's fundamental rights under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A and 21, and adds that the prayer for an ex parte stay is sought considering that the FIRs and complaints are filed across various states and the petitioner would be unable to be present in multiple courts and police stations for allegedly defaming Congress President Sonia Gandhi. Goswami has approached the apex court a day after at least 16 complaints were filed against him in the states of Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Telangana, and Chhattisgarh. Goswami has also invoked freedom of press in his plea and has claimed that the registration of FIRs and filing of such complaints against him tantamount to muzzling of the press. The Supreme Court on April 24, 2020 granted Arnav Goswami 3 weeks protection from any coercive action against him by police in a hate case. The court said Mr. Goswami can use the time to apply for anticipatory bail. Mr. Goswami contended that there is extremely urgent circumstances as several FIRs were registered against him by Congress party members in states ruled by the party or their political allies. Mr. Goswami said he had only provocatively questioned the comments made by a member of the Congress in relation to India's COVID-19 testing measures and the unfortunate lynching of 3 individuals, including 2 priests in Palghar on April 16, 2020. He said that he had reasonable and tangible grounds to believe that other FIRs will also be registered at the behest of the Indian National Congress persons in gross violation of his fundamental rights. The court said no action would be taken on future complaints in this regard. Mr. Rohtagi, representing Arnav Goswami, argued that his client had only asked his questions to the Congress chief in public interest. He had further debated the role of the police as a protective force. Mr. Goswami also sought police protection, saying he was attacked by 2 men. The court had asked the Mumbai police to take steps to protect him. Senior advocate Kapil Sibal for the Maharashtra government countered that comments of Mr. Goswami ignited communal violence, hence cannot be protected as free speech. He said nothing prevented Congress members from filing complaints. Congress leader Rahul Gandhi is appearing in defamation cases filed by BJP members in several states. Hence, FIRs can be filed against anyone, by anyone. The police should be given a free hand to investigate. You can have a detailed study on hate speech by going through the Law Commission report number 267 published in 2016. It gives an elaborative understanding about the hate speech vis-a-vis freedom of press. Now coming to the three tests which has been adopted by the courts while recognizing whether a speech amounts to hate speech or not. Once it has been established that there has been an interference with freedom of expression, the courts resort to a threefold analysis to determine the legitimacy of such interference. What are those threefold analysis? First one is the interference prescribed by law? That is, the restriction on freedom of speech and expression must be precise so that the citizens can regulate their conduct in accordance with law and foresee the consequences of the impermissible conduct. If the restriction is not precise, then it would be difficult for the citizen to regulate his own conduct in accordance with the law because he is not able to understand the law, right? Second, is the interference proportionate to the legitimate aim pursued? The restrictions imposed by the state on freedom of expression must be proportionate to the legitimate aim pursued. Otherwise, interference do not fall under the ambit of Article 19, Clause 2. Coming to the third requirement, is the interference necessary in a democratic society? As I already said, freedom of speech and expression has link with democracy. This test requires a careful examination of the fact to determine whether the freedom was limited in pursuance of the legitimate social need or in order to protect the principles and values underlying the Constitution. So let us wait for the judgment with regard to Arnav Goswami. Already the Supreme Court advised to club all the cases which are filed against Arnav Goswami in various high courts and to be transferred to the Supreme Court to deal with it at length in detail. We'll have one more case on freedom of speech and expression vis-a-vis freedom of press. Coming to the one more important scenario which is coming up, that is COVID-19 pandemic versus freedom of press. Alak Alok Srivastava versus Union of India case is now pending before the Supreme Court. On 31st March 2020, the Centre urged the Supreme Court while arguing in the writ petitions, that is Alok Srivastava versus Union of India, which is pertaining to the welfare of migrant workers affected by the lockdown. In this case, the court, as I said, Centre urged that government be given the control over media's coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Centre wanted to impose pre-censorship over the media, that is, nothing could be published about the pandemic without first ascertaining the true factual position from the central government. The reason why the government is asking the court to empower it with pre-censorship authority is to regulate the fake news which is circulated with reference to COVID-19 pandemic. Supreme Court refrained from accepting this demand of the central government for prior censorship. The court mentioned that permitting government to impose pre-censorship over media is not the duty of the judiciary. It is the duty of the executive and legislature to govern the nation. Judiciary is here to adjudicate when the fundamental right is infringed. Before being infringed, if judiciary had to interfere, it is not permitted as per the jurisprudence of the separation of powers. The court stated that in particular that it is expected from media, that is print, electronic or social, to maintain a strong sense of responsibility and ensure that unverified news capable of causing panic is not disseminated. Solicitor General submitted that a daily bulletin by the Government of India through all media avenues, including social media and forums, to clear the doubts of people would be made active within a period of 24 hours to provide right information to the public about the COVID-19 pandemic. The court said it is not intend to interfere with the free discussion about the pandemic, but direct the media refer to and publish the official version about the developments. You can also remember that in between there was a message which was circulated stating that any information with regard to COVID-19 is, if it is circulated in the WhatsApp groups, the admins will be held responsible for the fake news. Later, the bar and bench, Legally India, etc., clarified that particular direction which was stated as to be given by the Supreme Court of India is a fake news. So likewise, there is a requirement to regulate the fake news. Hence, this case also again will be one of the important case to deal with the fake news and so on forth. Now coming to the another interesting case which is upcoming, that is filed on 6th April 2020. On 6th April 2020, Jamaat Ulema-e-Hind has moved the Supreme Court claiming that the media has communalized the Nizamuddin Markaz event where about 2,500 individuals congregated in the midst of the coronavirus outbreak. The plea filed by Advocate Izaz Makbul states that reports on the Tablighi Jamaat by certain sections of print and electronic media has demonized the entire Muslim community. The plea further states that this demonization of the community has led to serious threat to life and liberty of Muslims and has thus led to the violation of their right to life under Article 21. The petition says that most of the reports presented the facts in a twisted manner using phrases like Corona Jihad, Corona terrorism, or Islamic resurrection. The petitioner organization contends that if there is any delay in ordering a directive to stop communal reporting regarding the Markaz issue, it would only promote ill will, enmity, and hatred towards Muslim community in India. The plea states the following questions of law arise for the court's consideration. Whether giving a communal angle while covering the Nizamuddin Markaz event has violated Article 21 of the Muslim community. Whether such reporting giving a communal flavor is in violation of the Cable Television Network Regulation Act 1995. Whether such reporting demonizing the entire Muslim community is contrary to the principles of secularism. Whether the government failed in its duty in failing to prohibit such transmission of such programs, where a communal angle was given to the entire incident in accordance with sections 19 and 20 of the Cable Television Network Regulation Act 1995 and also in accordance with clause 8 of the policy guidelines uplinking of television channels. Whether government failed to stop fake news and communal statements from being spread on social media websites. Terming it as grossly irresponsible behavior on part of the media, the plea states that such reports have created divisions in the society. The petition further states that spreading of such communally charged news and yellow journalism has the effect of pitting different communities against each other and can also have the effect of creating social unrest in the country. The petition also stated that such fake reports were in violation of Supreme Court's order of March 31st, by which the media was directed to publish official version of reports dealing with COVID-19 outbreak, which I just explained. Media was directed to maintain a strong sense of responsibility and ensure that unverified news capable of causing panic would not be disseminated. The petition has prayed for strict action against sections of media spreading bigotry and communal hatred in relation to the Nizamuddin Markaz issue. It goes on to highlight that the recent Delhi riots was one of the worst communal riots in the Union Territory's history, and that communizing the Tablighi Jamaat meet puts the law and order situation of the entire state at risk. We need to wait for the outcome of these latest issues and see how court interprets the freedom of press in this unique situation of COVID-19 pandemic. Now coming to the laws which deals with the freedom of press are Press Council of India Act 1978, Press Council of India's Norms of Journalistic Conduct 2019. For TV, the Cable Television Networks Regulation Act 1995. For digital news, the Information Technology Act 2000. The Media and the Disaster Management Act 2005, the Media and the Indian Penal Code 1860. So with this, I think I covered almost all cases with regard to freedom of press. If there are any cases which are left, you please go through those cases and share those cases on WhatsApp. Now coming to the censorship of films, I am not going to deal with the cases. I am just going to give you the list of cases. You can go through on your own. K. Abbas versus Union of India, AR 1971, SC 481. This is a case with reference to a film, A Tale of Four Cities. Next, S. Rangarajan versus P. Jagajeevan Ram, 1989, 2 SCC 574. This is with reference to the film Ore Oru Gramathile, that is in just one village. Third, Bobby Art International versus Ompal Singh Hoon. This is with reference to the Bandit Queen film. We have some more controversies, that is Da Vinci film controversy. Sony Pictures Releasing of India Limited versus State of Tamil Nadu. It's a Madras High Court judgment. Vishwarupam, Kamal Hassan's movie controversy. Again, the Madras High Court judgment. PK movie controversy. Messenger of God film controversy. That is Dera Sacha Sauda Chief Gurmeet Ram Rahim Singh's story. Padmavat movie controversy. Urta Punjab movie controversy. Likewise, you have so many movies which have been brought into contravention. Now coming to the instructions, reasonable restrictions which were covered through this presentation will not be repeated again. They are sovereignty and integrity of nation clubbed with security of the state, public order and incitement to an offense, friendly relation with foreign states. Restriction do not have any case laws, so I am not going to deal with that. Next lecture will be on decency or morality in relation with defamation and contempt of court.